Suzyn, I became a baseball fan at age 12 watching the Iron Man not take a single day off in over 16 years of work. Growing up in Massachusetts, was there one moment that shaped your love for the game?
Oh, gosh, yeah. I was 3, and I can remember holding my grandfather's hand and walking up the little ramp at Fenway Park and out into the sunshine and looking out at that place, which looked to me like the little jewelry box that I had with green velvet in it with the little ballet. Remember the little ballet dancer that came up and sang? And I just walked up there, and my grandfather's seats were right in the first row next to the Red Sox on deck circle. And I just thought the whole thing was wonderful, and I just loved it. And I just, something about it, I was a baby. I was a tiny little child. And there was just something about maybe holding the hand of my grandfather or seeing the sights and smells of that park, and then of course the players. I just thought the whole thing was magic. It was like music to me.
I'm listening to you, Suzyn. I'm thinking of my conversation not too long ago with Jean Afterman about how she started in theater, and I'm wondering the parallels between theater and baseball, and if that kind of progresses into present day. Are there any?
Oh my goodness, yes, I absolutely think so. And it's performing. Theater is performing, baseball is performing. And I always kid people, and I talk about this particular job that I have now is the greatest role I've ever played. I mean, because it is a performance every single night. You're telling the truth, but that's theater also. And I think that performers on stage or musicians are the same people as baseball players. I used to say to Wade Boggs all the time, the same thing that puts a bat in your hand is the same thing that makes me stand out on the field and sing the national anthem in a World Series with 250 million people or whatever it is watching it. It's the same personality. They're performers. Everybody can play baseball. Not everybody can make a living at it. Everyone can sing. Not everyone can make a living at it. It's a certain kind of person. And so I think, and Jean Afterman also has that kind of empathy. It's the same simpatico. We're all performers. So yes, I think there's a real bond there.
You talk performers, Suzyn. Your first performance on the big stage back in 1987, WFAN launches the first 24-hour sports radio station in America.
And welcome to the first broadcast of WFAN All Sports 1050. You're sharing a part of radio history with us today. This is the beginning of the first 24-hour-a-day sports station. I'm Suzyn Waldman, and I'll be right back with the latest WFAN sports update.
First update ever comes on the air, and it's your voice. You nervous? What are you thinking?
I got to tell you, Lauren, that after the first update, I was thinking, oh, my goodness, this is going to be harder than I thought. It's really strange to realize when you're sort of close to middle age that half the world thinks you're an idiot because you're female. And I never realized that. I mean, I never had that in my whole life. I grew up, I did whatever I wanted. I wanted to go in theater, I went in theater. I went to ball games. I didn't know I was an idiot. I didn't know sports. I'd known baseball since I was 3. I knew basketball and hockey and football the same way. And it was kind of startling to realize that, people didn't want you there solely because you were female.
Did you always, Suzyn, feel like you knew everything? I remember my first news director when I was leaving Minot, North Dakota. He gave me advice. He said, Lauren, if someone asks if you know table tennis, you say yes. If someone asks if you can broadcast cross-country skiing, just say yes and figure it out later. How much of figuring it out later was there for you, or did you know it all at the time?
No, all of it. I knew things. I mean, all the things that shit. It was like in theater. I auditioned for a show and you had to roller skate. I mean, yeah, I can roller skate. Yeah, I can ride a horse. How many actors have said I can ride a horse? No, absolutely. And when I convinced the then program director at WFAN, after they moved me to overnights thinking that I was going to quit, and I didn't, I said, boy, I got to figure out what to do. And what I did was think of something that no one was doing. And that was become a an electric beat reporter. I said to the then program director, give me one of those big tape recorders. I'll go anywhere. I'll get sound. I'll report on the air. We don't have to rely on newspaper guys. And what I learned really fast was I'd learned how to do this. I didn't know how to do any of that. I'm having trouble with Zooms. I can't turn the sound on. Just imagine me going with, carts and things and having to cut my own tape. I didn't know what I was doing. So I had to figure out something that I could do. And then I figured it out later. I said, I'll go get tape at Yankee Stadium, Shea Stadium, whatever you want me to do. And I figured it out.
I see the way the players gravitate towards you. There is such a respect, and of course you've earned it, but it wasn't always that way.
You think?
Right?
Well, you know what? It always was in the Yankee clubhouse. When I walked into the Yankee clubhouse, Don Mattingly was the captain. Dave Winfield did I don't know if you know this story. Dave Winfield did something when I first met him, what the acts of kindness I got in that clubhouse from the players because I was in there was amazing. My first friend in that clubhouse was Rickey Henderson. And Winfield, you got to remember, this is 1987. I walk in there. Nobody talked to me in the press box. I sat in that press box for a solid season and nobody said a word to me. And I sat in the radio press box and they didn't want me there because I was taking a job away from a real reporter. And
What's
I was
a real reporter?
A male. Guy, a male. All right, that was easy. Dave Winfield had been struggling at the plate. And one of the reasons was that Willie Randolph and Rickey Henderson were batting ahead of him, and they weren't there. They were injured. So Rickey and Willie came back, and Winfield went something like 3 for 5, had 6 RBIs, all those kinds of things. And I wrote all this stat down, what had happened, and it was my first question in the Yankee clubhouse. And I pressed my tape, and they're all quiet and looking at me, and I started to asked the question and I made a mistake. And as I'm thinking, do I keep going and pretend that I don't know that I made a mistake and not be able to use it? Or do I stop and let those guys in back of me go, ha, pshee, pshee. And as I was thinking of what to do, Dave Winfield put his hand out and stopped the tape and said, I don't like the way I answered the last question and you've got it on there. Can we start that again? It was just as... you find those guys and then you sort of learn. The big one was in the Toronto clubhouse in 1987. Not everybody was as gracious as the Yankees were. I don't know if you know this story, but Jesse Barfield is my hero and will always be my hero because I was in the Toronto Blue Jays clubhouse. That was a tough group back in 87. And what I used to do back then was I'd look at the media guide. And I'd look to see if someone went to college and where they went to school. And on that team was Jeff Musselman, who went to Harvard. And I said, he's not going to yell at me. And my dear late friend, John Cerruti, who went to Amherst. And I'm thinking, he's got a degree in economics. I've got a degree in economics. He won't yell at me either. So I'm over talking to him. And George Bell was in that clubhouse, and he had not been talking to the New York writers all year. Well, he decided to talk that afternoon. So I went over with my big clunky microphone, and he started screaming and yelling, get her out of here. Awful. I'm not talking to any of you unless she's out of here, swearing and throwing things. And the writers just all stood there. They just all stood there and watched. And this was my first year, and I started to get tears in my eyes and just said to myself, let me get out of here before I start to cry. And it was like dead silence, like a movie. A cartoon where they all go silent. And I started to walk towards the door, and there's silence. And all of a sudden I hear, what's her name? And somebody said, Suzyn something. And I hear Suzyn, and I turned around, and it was Jesse Barfield. And he said, I went 3 for 5 today. Don't you want to talk to me? And it was just another act of incredible kindness. And I went over with my tape, and he was reciting poetry. They were going to go to Baltimore. It was so amazing. We're a chapter in a children's book, Jesse Barfield and I. And imagine my delight when he was traded to the New York Yankees 2 years later.
I have goosebumps, you telling that story. There's so much kindness in the clubhouse and around baseball. There is, and then there have been so much. And then there's been recent incidents of unwanted texts or phone calls and advances. When you hear about what's currently happening at times in a clubhouse, what's your thought on progress?
Well, my thought on progress is probably not what everybody thinks. My first radio game was 1993. I didn't get the Yankee gig on radio till 2005. That's a long time between radio gigs. I was obviously reporting and doing TV. But what I do think about all of this is that there's always been problems. My problems were instead of texts, I'd get like used condoms in the mail or feces in the mail or terrible things. I had my own police detail in 1989 because someone was actually trying to kill me at the stadium. And if I came out to the players' parking lot and my car was started, I would know that someone had phoned in a bomb threat. You know, what's going on now, this is not a woman in baseball situation. And to me, the narrower we make this, the longer it goes on. This is a woman in society problem. And what's been happening now is no different from 15 years casting couches that I did in theater, or working as a temporary secretary when you'll get fired if you don't do such and such, or a judge that I know that told me that she was blackmailed by her law professor for a grade if she didn't do such and such. This is a woman in society problem. And there is progress. I'll tell you one thing that I think is progress, but we're not going to make real progress until it's not so narrow that it's a baseball problem. This is everybody's problem. The one thing that I know that you have and the women that are going through this now, I was alone. I was totally alone. And if something happened, and there's lots that I'll never tell anybody that went on, but if I didn't handle it, someone would say, well, then we'll get somebody that can. And nobody helped me. Nobody. And the younger women that I see now, you all have help. You all have people that support you. And the first time I really realized that things have changed was when Stephanie Epstein wrote in Sports Illustrated about the Houston situation in that clubhouse with the assistant GM who got fired. If that had happened 30 years ago and the team had said she was lying and she made it up, she'd have been fired. And that would have been the end of her career. But every broadcaster and beat writer that was in there, mostly male, said, no, it happened. It happened. And that's what I think is progress, is that there are now support systems. And you talk about the women back there, and I can name them, we're all still friends. We were alone. And that was really, and if you didn't handle it yourself, they'd get rid of you and say, see, it doesn't work. See, she shouldn't be in there. And that's the thing that bothers me, that when you make it just a baseball thing, someone eventually is going to say, well, then get somebody else if she can't do it.
And that's why when girls like me say, women like you paved the way, we wouldn't be here without you, they're not hollow words. They're real. They're real. I always learn from you. Thank you so much for the conversation, the honesty, Suzyn. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lauren.